We're so blessed to have Marta with us. This is going to be kind of like a talk show. This is not a talk show. I don't get to do this. Marta's going to tell us a little bit about her own life. Marta Zaknoon is a friend of ours from Toronto, Canada. Sorry about the curling.
He's been making fun of me the whole time.
It's great. Marta lives in Toronto with her husband and her children. She's originally a Catholic Palestinian from Jerusalem, and she carries with her the experience of that community and really a desire to share the testimonies of the people that she's met along the way. She had the idea to put together a documentary of Christian refugees in the Middle East, and her friends in Toronto joined her in that effort as she put together an exhibit. After spending time and visiting and revisiting interviews and footage that they took, they decided to focus on the specific community in Jordan, in the area of Jordan. There's a lot more to say, but we'll let her say most of it this evening. Can you all see in the back? Is it better if we stand when we speak? It's better if we stand if we speak. So when you speak, we'll just take turns. One of us has to be sitting. This is like an old improv. Good.
I'm okay.
Yeah, not good. Let's welcome Marta.
Thank you, Father Alex, and thank you all so much. I just want to say I've been here. I arrived here a couple of days ago, and I feel like we're family. People have been so warm and welcoming to me. I'm just overwhelmed, really. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to briefly tell you what this exhibit about and how it came to be. As Father Alex mentioned, I'm from the Middle East. I grew up there. I lived most of my life there. And so the Holy Land, but the entire Middle East is very dear to me. Just like this place is very dear to you. But I'm also, I have a deep affection for all the communities, and I have a deep affection for my own community. And as you know, may have seen in the news, there had been a lot of persecution of Christians in the Middle East, and we saw the images from Iraq, from Egypt, from many countries. I'm not going to go into details of what the persecution is and what happened here and now. You will get information about it throughout the exhibit. But I want to tell you what started this interest for me and my friends in Toronto. I was looking, as we all did, at those images of persecution, and I was thinking, what does this have to do with me now that I'm in Toronto? Not only what can I do about it, like concretely, but what does it have to do with me and with my friends, with our existence here? And so I felt that it was necessary to get in touch with people there and communicate. And so I set up a Skype call with the Bishop of Mosul, the Chaldean Bishop of Mosul, Bishop Nona, and just with a bunch of friends, we just asked him some questions. We asked him to tell us the story of what is going on. And he was, at that point, he had left Mosul because his life was at risk, and he was living in Australia at that point. And so he told us, we asked him many questions, and he recounted many facts. And at the end, we said to him, but what can we do? And he said, there are many things you can do. You can help in very concrete ways. But the first and most important thing is that you live your life fully and joyfully wherever you are. A Christian full life wherever you are. And that intrigued us a lot, because what does this mean, really, to live like fully my life as a Christian wherever I am? And around that same time, there was a bunch of videos circulating of testimonies from Christians in refugee camps, and there was this video of this little girl, Miriam. I don't know if you came across it, but this little girl, she was 6, I think. She was talking about her experience of fleeing her hometown. I think she's from Karakosh in Iraq. And she was saying at some point that she did not hate the people that did this to her, and that she forgave them, because this is what Jesus asked her to do. And I was very struck by this little girl saying this. And so it intrigued me even more to understand, like, how are these people living now? So together with some friends, all of these factors, came together. Plus, I myself come from a family of Palestinian refugees because of a different war, a different conflict. So I felt that also the question of refugees is close to my heart, wherever they're from. So basically, I decided that I wanted to go and meet some of these communities. I knew that there was a big community of Iraqi refugees and some Syrian refugees in Jordan, that within the time limit that I had, to come to put together this documentary, they were in Jordan, and that was a place that was the most accessible to me at that time, the fastest. So I got in touch with a friend of mine from an NGO, and we organized this 7-day touring trip to all camps in Amman, Jordan. And so I went and I met with them, and really the interest for me was to listen to their narrative about what happened to them, but also to ask the question, so what now? What keeps you going now? What makes you wake up in the morning now? Like, where's your faith now? Because these people, when we talk about persecution, Father Alex mentioned, the violence, but really also what it comes down to is that these people at some point were given a choice. When ISIS arrived to their towns, they said to them, you can choose to live here and pay a tax, or you can leave. You can pay a tax and live as a Christian, but you have to pay that tax, and you live under the conditions that I say you should live. Or you leave, or you pay with your life, pretty much. So these people left everything. Everything. I'm saying, I mean it. They didn't have time, their passports were confiscated on the way out. So they arrived to whichever places they arrived, whichever neighboring countries, including Jordan, pretty much nothing. And all of that because they wouldn't renounce their faith. And to me, that was a very provoking thought, because I was thinking, how many times would I come across a provocation like this, where someone would ask me to say yes to Christ and give everything, and I'm willing to do it, whichever my circumstances are. So these people really gave up everything: jobs, homes, stability, their past, in a way, their future, and they left. So when I went to meet them, I was really struck, because there were a lot of different emotions, a lot of different reactions. And I want to emphasize that what you will see throughout the exhibit is not representative of all the Middle East, all of the Christians, all of the refugees, and bearing in mind also that there's a huge refugee crisis that goes beyond the Christian community as well. There are 4 million Syrians that are refugees right now, and the numbers keep going up. So I'm not saying that this encompasses the story of all refugees in the Middle East. But so when I met with them, I was struck by a few facts that I want to share with you. They are confronted with very difficult living conditions. Most of the people I met in 2014 were living in containers. You will see in the pictures if you go see the panels. Again, keeping in mind that some people now are living in tents, the containers might seem as a milder version of harsh circumstances, I guess. But so they're confronted with this difficult circumstance. Many of them lived in parish halls before they could have a container for each family. So they were like 200, just like us, living in a parish hall together for months, sharing the bathrooms of the churches, families, children. These are the conditions they were living in Jordan. And I listened to their narratives in their language, which is my language, and it was interesting to see how their emotions were so sincere and genuine, and their narratives really spoke to my heart in a way. So they struggle mostly with the uncertainty of tomorrow because they're refugees. They don't have a legal status. They are not allowed to work. And so there's this uncertainty about the future of their children. Many of them are in their 50s, 60s and had an established, life, a job. And they don't think about how necessarily to rebuild their lives because they're already in their 60s. But they worry about the future of their children. Many of their children are about to finish university, graduate, one more exam and that's it. Maybe get engaged, get married, everything got interrupted. So they're in this moment of uncertainty and they're kind of stuck because they cannot work. It's not legal, and if they work, they get deported, if they work illegally. So there's a big struggle. But I think what struck me the most is that amid, the struggle and the tears and the difficulty and the frustration, there is no sense that God abandoned them. And this struck me a lot because many of them would say to me, this is a trial. This is a trial. Nobody ever said, God is punishing me, God is abandoning me, God gave up on us. Who is God? It was really striking to me because I think so many times in my own skepticism or with my friends, we were thinking at the first difficulty that we have, the first thing we do is doubt God's love for us. So for me, it was amazing to see these people sitting in containers and saying, I trust, just like we were singing 2 minutes ago. I trust that He will take care of me. That was an experience that I cannot forget. And it intrigued me because they had the simplicity of heart to say that. They weren't complicated. They're not theological geniuses, They're very simple people, just like you and I, And so the fact that they see this trial also, I saw in them the striving and the trying to follow their hope and follow a desire to live. So you will see in the stories, in some of the stories, the fact that they went through this tragedy does not suppress their desire to live a beautiful life or to live fully. One of the ladies was saying to my friend from the NGO, she was saying to him, I'm struggling to get up in the morning because I can't work and I don't know what I should wake up for. So why do I get up in the morning? And he said to her, what are you good at? What is your talent? And she said, I'm a very good cook. So he said to her, okay, I'm going to help you. And he put together this initiative where she started cooking and he started a chain of distribution of food to other refugee camps. And that gave a meaning to her staying there and to her getting up in the morning. But she wanted to work. She desired to work, to contribute, to create something, even if she's not paid for it as a refugee. So that was very, very beautiful to see. And, I think all of them, and you'll see it in the witnesses, all of them keep saying, I just desire for my children to have a future, to be able to continue their studies, to get an education, maybe one day to have a family. And to me that was very relatable. Ultimately we all want to be fulfilled in those very different ways, right? And I think that it was striking that all of this, the source of all of these expressions, was their faith and their trust in God. They truly entrust themselves to God. And I really don't want to spoil the exhibit for you, and in a way I want to force you to go and see it, so I'm not going to tell you all the stories. But I think the relationship with God is one of trust and awe of the mystery of that He is. So even though they cannot explain why things happen to them, they trust that He takes care of them. And I think for this reason, I think their lives have a lot to say to us, not just because we need to, think of them and help them financially and sponsor them or help them stay there. I don't know what is the right thing to do. But I think it's important that we stay in communion with them, which means that we live like fully that life. And that we pray for them, and that we think of them, and that we live our lives with the awareness of what happened to them, not with resentment towards anyone, but like with a desire to witness something beautiful. And I think, you can go and see those stories, and they might just inspire, pity, compassion, empathy, which are all fantastic and very useful. But I want to take on what Father Alex told you in the first meeting, in his talk about unity, when he invited you to ask and to bring your questions. And I think the same applies to this exhibit, that when we look at those stories, that we look within our questions about our lives, about our faith. And I think in that way, maybe their stories will say much more to us than just generate momentary emotion that after will go away and we'll just forget about them. I think they changed my life a lot. They changed my friend's life in Toronto, and none of them are Middle Eastern. And that in itself is a miracle. And I think they just changed our awareness throughout our days by their witness. So they're a gift to us. They became our friends, our companions. And we need to look, I think, at them. I don't say it in a preachy way. I say it also because the place where they live is our origin. It's not my origin. It's our origin, our history. There's I was telling Father Alex, the custos of the Holy Land, the custodian of the Holy Land, which is a Franciscan friar, once said to us, there's a history of salvation and there's a geography of salvation. The history, we know the facts, right? But the geography is that place where they live. It's the Holy Land, it's those places, and this is why those places are dear to us. And this is why those communities are dear to us. I think this is mainly what I wanted to share. I hope I didn't.
That's great. Well, first, I want to say that I want to say that it's really incredible that you felt the need to respond to something that you were seeing in your life. The fact that you saw that something was happening to people that you loved and people that you belonged to, and that you wanted to somehow understand their experience of what they were living. It's a perfect example of what we were saying last week, that no one should walk alone, that we should accompany each other in this. But one of the images that I used last week was this image of a mountain, that we can only see one side of the mountain at a time. We can't see the whole thing at the same time. But I just want to ask you, from your experience of kind of learning about these refugees and the way that they're living their faith, what perspective do they offer to us in terms of how we live our faith? What view do they have of the church and of God that maybe could be helpful for us?
Based on the conversations I had with them and on my upbringing also there, I think their relationship with God is very similar to their relationship with their mother. It's one of trust and entrusting themselves, and therefore it might seem on the surface as if it's almost simplistic, but in the reality it's just simplicity, like simplicity of heart. And so the relationship with God is that when there is a trial, the sense that God doesn't abandon them is because it's like their mother when she corrects them on something or challenges them on something. It's not that she doesn't love them anymore. It's just that she's the mother. So nobody doubts his own mother that way. And I think what struck me also when I was there is that it's as if with that simplicity of heart, there was a sense that not only this is a trial, but for some of them, not all of them, but some of them, and those were the ones that you will see in the video that struck me a lot. They have a sense that difficulties and challenges, big challenges, are precisely the place where God seeks you. And this is where he communicates with you. And so it's interesting that they see this path that they've been put through as a path of purification of their faith and of their belonging. Because I think even in the Middle East, despite the fact that we're a minority, we could very well live our belonging in a cultural way, in a superficial way, if we want to. And I think the fact that we have this drama sometimes filters and pushes us to not live our belonging in a superficial way. So I think for them, I see that when I was there, they had gone to a point where they understand that this happened to them for them to understand also something more about themselves, their relationship with God, and what He wants from them. It was interesting to see that they are really at the mercy of the help of people and aid, and they can't provide for themselves. But they are also able to say, with a lot of humility, like, I'll go where God wants me to go. I don't know where that is, but I'm trusting in Him, because what else could I do at this point? I don't know if this answers.
Yeah, and I think for those in the parish who have been to Haiti, this was an experience I think that we realized when we went down there. Our sister parish in Haiti, Saint Suzanne. When you look at the community that surrounds that church, that those people depend on the church, not in some superficial way, not because they need something to do, not because they need a place to hang out on Sundays, not because they're looking for friends, but because they depend on the church. Like if the church weren't there, they wouldn't eat. They wouldn't have a place to get clean water. They wouldn't have a way to survive. They wouldn't have a way to educate their children. And I think so often we take that dependence for granted. We say, I depend on God. But do we really depend on God? I mean, in this way, it's really put in front of them in a very kind of striking way, I would say. The other thing that I just want to ask you is, Christians in the Middle East, obviously the violence that we see is very obvious. I mean, they're blatantly being persecuted in a physical kind of way, and so they're forced in some way. You mentioned this drama. They're forced in some ways to make a decision. Do I believe enough to leave everything behind, like we hear about the disciples in the gospel? Do I really believe enough to leave everything behind? Or is my faith, kind of at a place where I can say, I can deal with it. I can deal with kind of leaving that behind. And so for them, it's a very dramatic circumstance. But I wonder for us, and since you live kind of in the Western world now, for us in the West, whose maybe biggest complaint is that the Mass time got changed, you know. I mean, what are we missing because that drama isn't there? What are we missing because we don't wake up in the morning and say, I wonder if I can go to church this morning safely? Or I wonder if I'm going to have to leave this town and go to another town because I'm no longer welcome there. We don't live that kind of drama. And so, what has it been like for you, I guess, to transition to the Western world? And because even going to school, you felt that tension growing up.
I mean, I live in a Palestinian area of Jerusalem, so I spent, just to contextualize a little bit what Father Alex is saying, I used to pass a checkpoint, and my dad used to pass 3 of them on his way to work. So I spent pretty much my entire life, and I consider myself lucky for where I lived. I woke up at 5 every morning to be at school at 8:30. And it wasn't because of traffic, it's just because it depends on the mood of the soldier that morning or the warning that is out there. So these are the factors that we have to deal with. And for Iraqis or Syrians, they need to take into consideration like bombs or curfews, or it's even more extreme. And I think we had this drama, that sort of pushes you to understand, to verify your faith, to understand why you belong to the community that you belong to, and why do you stay in the place where you are, or why do you leave. And I think that when I moved to Canada, which, pretty much the concerns are, oh my God, my sink just broke. What a disaster. It's a very safe country, everything works perfectly. It was almost irritating for me. Because I think that part of the challenge of living like the drama of war brings you also to have to engage with the others, the different, good and bad. You have to have an interaction. You have to bump into each other at some point. And no matter how difficult and painful that bumping was, I actually thought that it actually contributed a lot to me understanding who I am as a Christian, because it was a challenge every single time. When someone doesn't want you to go to your graduation ceremony randomly, it's a challenge. It's a challenge when your religion, your beliefs say you need to turn the other cheek. It's a challenge. So I think even for them, that someone kicks you out of your home, is there a possibility of ever forgiving? Is there a possibility of restarting? So these are the dramas and the type of dynamics we needed to live in. But I think that in the West, now that I'm in Canada, I discovered we have other challenges. They might look milder on the surface, but they're actually very aggressive. Very, very aggressive. I think sometimes we have a sense that we live in very tolerant societies, accepting societies, but then the truth is that sometimes we live in parallel with each other. We don't really bump into each other. We don't really engage with each other. And that to me is something that that can be a little bit disturbing sometimes, if I may describe it like this. I think also as a Christian in the West today, I feel bombarded by a secular mentality that wants me to believe certain things and to act in a given way. And I think, especially for the generation of my children, it's like slowly like numbing them to what the truth of their life is, really. Through different mediums that like, so I think, whether it's ethical issues or educational issues or, in Canada we're very advanced. We pass many laws on many things that on the surface seem so progressive, but they're so detrimental to our humanity, really. From euthanasia to a bunch of other things, And the problem is that I feel like the biggest violence is the violence to my freedom to be what I want to be, and to think with my conscience sometimes, So I think some of our friends that you will see in the exhibit lived under totalitarian regimes, openly, overtly totalitarian regimes, but in a way. I think we live in a place where there's a lot of aggressive policies that undermine our freedoms here as well. And sometimes we don't know, we don't see it because it's not as open or as violent. Maybe it's more subtle, but I feel that like I have more worries about raising my kids here than raising my kids in the Holy Land. And I live in Canada, a very safe country. Because I think if they were to live in the Holy Land, they might be less safe from a security point of view, but they'll definitely know who they are. So,
it's really striking. When we had lunch the other day, that point really hit me. That many of our children can become young adults without ever really having to ask themselves, but do I believe in Jesus? But do I want to follow him? Do I want to kind of give myself for him? Whereas in the Holy Land in the Middle East, that's a question that's kind of being put in front of them on a regular basis. And for you, that you experience that as well. I just wonder, seeing so much heartache and seeing the struggles that people face, how do you not become like cynical? How do you not look at the world and say, gosh, it's hopeless, we're losing the battle. How do you maintain hope in the face of the struggles that you've witnessed?
That's a good one. I think, for me, there was a phase when I was in the Holy Land where I realized that, sadly, I was a little bit used to war. I wasn't numb to death, but I was numb to the conflict I was living in. It was just part of my reality, and I just learned to operate in it, But the truth is that what pulls me out of, I don't think I ever reached the level of like being cynical, because I think as I said, I grew up. I come from a family of refugees, and I think cynicism just had no place in my family, because if I think of my grandfather, he was a very profoundly religious man. He wasn't a pious man. He was a religious man. He was very. He prayed, but it wasn't about that. It was about the way he lived his life after what happened to him. My grandfather became a refugee in 1948 because the state of Israel established itself, and so my grandparents lived in a small Palestinian town. It was a Christian town, and they were asked to leave the town, pretty much. And now there are still the ruins of the town, but the church is still standing. And every year at Easter, our entire community gathers there and prays. And it's a little town in Galilee, in the north, close to the border with Lebanon. And to me, I go back to my grandfather because my grandfather never lived his life defeated. He never lived his life he lived with the wound of the injustice that was done to him, but he didn't live, the war and the injustice didn't have the last word on his life. So he carried on, he tried to, provide for his family, start to work somewhere else, collaborate with, friends, rebuilt his life slowly, but most of all, he never expressed any type of hatred or resentment towards anyone. So much that, when he passed away, at his funeral, many of the people that attended were actually Jews. And my grandfather had nothing to do with politics. He wasn't a collaborator. He just had apple fields. That's all he did. So it was beautiful for me to see that, his response to the injustice was living that Christian witness and that relationship, even with his aggressor. And I think this is why in my family there was never room for cynicism. We always believed in the mission and in our presence there, and we had an affection for our land, And I think that looking at their life in parallel to mine, at the life of these refugees that I met, what struck me is that the hope that they experience in their communities, in the life of their communities. Just to give you an example, I don't want to be too long, but I arrived to interview a priest, just like yours, a young priest, and I enter in this church.
It's okay.
You'll see his picture. They have more in common than you would think. And I just entered, and I hear next to his office, the singing. And I said to him, "What's going on?" So he's like, "This is our choir." And so I go, and I see these 30 young people in their 20s that are practicing choir for the 5-6 masses that they have to celebrate. They have to send out buses to different refugee camps to get people to come to Mass. This is in Amman. And when I was looking at their faces, I wondered, why are you singing? What is it that makes you able to sing? And what are you singing for? And one of them said to me, "I sing because it's like praying twice." And you could see on their faces that it wasn't just talk. He really believed what he said to me. And the fact that they had these different refugees that didn't know each other before, because they're from different cities, come together, and instead of crying over themselves and being refugees, they come together to practice, to sing for choir, and they say to me, "This is our home." I think that what pulls us out of our cynicism is to rediscover where we belong to, and to rediscover what is it that makes us happy. I think we become cynical when we don't know what is fulfilling to us, when we lost sight of what is the dearest of all, Many of them said to me over and over, "I lost everything, but I kept the most precious of all." So I think we fall into cynicism when we don't have a friendship where we're helped to look at reality in a different way. And I think their experience of the church, that choir, is an experience of a friendship where even when reality is really, really dark, you keep looking and desiring the beautiful and trying to walk towards it more and more, in a very simple way with whatever you can,
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think it was St. Bonaventure said, "If I have everything but Christ, I have nothing. And if I have nothing but Christ, I have everything." And it's so true. It must be so true for these folks. We have time maybe for just a couple of questions. If anyone has any questions.
How did you arrive in Canada?
The question was, how did you arrive in Canada?
I did not choose to go to Canada. I didn't want to leave Jerusalem. I love Jerusalem, and I felt like it belonged to me and I belonged to it. I would never have left. Life happened. My husband, who's Italian, was a pilgrim, and we met in Jerusalem when he was there with a bunch of friends. And 3 years later, we got married, and he got a job offer in Canada, and that was like our option. We didn't that was a good possibility for us to grow a family. So we moved. But yeah, I'm not a Canadian citizen. I'm still a permanent resident. I don't know where I'm going to be in a few years. Vittorio and I, my husband, we often talk about going back to Jerusalem and opening a hospital at some point. I don't know why a hospital, he's just obsessed. And he's not a doctor, he's an engineer. Like totally random. But yeah, so I have a great affection, and I try to go back as much as possible. And we divide ourselves between my family and his family. His family's in Italy, mine is in Jerusalem, so yeah, that's why I'm moving, really.
Did any of the refugees express hope in returning to their homeland to recreate that Christian community that's been pushed away?
The question was, sorry, I'm repeating. Do any of the refugees, have they expressed a desire to return to their homeland after their experience away?
That's a great question, and many people ask me this question. See, when I got there in 2014, the wound was very fresh. The pain of somehow the betrayal, the breach of trust that happened with their neighbors was still there. So I would lie to you if I would say that the majority of them were rushing back to Mosul. No, they're very scared. They're very worried about the future of their children. And although some of them told me stories, that give hope, because some of them experience betrayal by certain neighbors that turns against them, but also some of them experience help from neighbors that help them escape when there was danger. So they had both experiences. And I think it's beautiful, you'll see in the video, but it's interesting that many of them, the ones that were more open to the idea of going back, were the ones also that expressed so fervently a trust in God. It's really interesting. Many of them hope to come to North America or go to Australia. Some of them are open to the idea of going back to Mosul if it's safe enough, Mosul or other cities, if it's safe enough for them to go back. Not too long ago in the news, I saw some images of some people from the Muslim community in Mosul trying to rebuild the churches that were destroyed. And to me, that was moving, because I think we all benefit from a witness. We all benefit from a sharing of life, But I think for many of them, at that point, there was a breach of trust. In Arabic, there's an expression that says, we had bread and salt among us. And it was just, people forgot. And so they were in pain. But I think many of them were just looking for the possibility to rebuild the future of their children, wherever that is, wherever they would go. And I think it's a very tricky question for us. For instance, my parish in Toronto sponsored many Syrian refugees, many Iraqi refugees, and they're adamant that this is the right thing to do. We need to bring them all here. Well, I don't know if we need to bring them all here. Maybe we should ask them, what do you want to do? I mean, they already lost their home. Maybe we should listen to them a little bit, not to say that they don't want to come to here, because to be honest, when I first arrived in a few of the churches, people would actually almost jump at me thinking that I'm from the UN and I'm preparing the reports, and they would beg me to help them. But I think more than anything else, It's just the unbearable circumstances that they live in that makes them want to leave. Just take me anywhere, just take me out of this, because how can you live like with 4 kids in a container for over 2 years with winter and summer, and these are living in containers. Like some people live in tents, like I said before. So, and it's the same for all refugees, not just Christian refugees. The Syrian refugees have dreadful circumstances right now. So it's a huge problem. But I think many of them have the awareness of their belonging. And one of the mothers you'll see in the video, I had to cut that part off because there was a limit of time, But at some point I asked her, what is it that you miss the most of Karakosh? And she teared up. That was the moment she started to cry, and she said to me, I miss Palm Sunday in my town, because we would go out and we would have the procession, we would put on our best clothes, and everybody would be there in the streets. And I knew exactly what she was talking about. I've seen this in Jerusalem. I've experienced it. And so I think they love their country. They loved their towns. They were part of the community. They weren't on the sidelines. They participated. So I think they definitely have a nostalgia for their homes and for the life they left behind. But I think they always have to evaluate, like, my children, their safety. Some of them said to me, we left the minute we knew that our daughters could be kidnapped. And how can I blame you? Like, I would do the same, right? So.
Yes, one more.
So, in true North American style, let's focus back on us again. How would we? So how would? You're talking about how we live in parallel societies here in the West. How can we best bump into each other without causing resentment or?
I think that's a super question. So I think here in America, I didn't travel that much in America, but I get a sense that you bump into each other a little bit more than Canadians do, which already, you're ahead of us. But I think what I mean by bumping into each other is not necessarily having like these endless interreligious dialogues.
Right.
Like I don't. Sorry, Father. I don't know if I have it. Knowing the other and his narrative and where he comes from doesn't mean that I have to agree on everything and embrace his way of life. We just have to find a way to understand where we are coming from. And I'm not saying we should compromise on our beliefs, on our belonging, on our history. I'm all for it. I think actually we gain more by being more ourselves than being less of ourselves. I think many of the problems we have here is because we don't want to be ourselves anymore. We're okay with a watered down version of ourselves, of our history, of what we used to be, I think, when you, like a Christian encounter is an encounter where you stay with someone without like an expectation of them, on them, to change so that you can love them. I think this is what always amazed me about Christianity, is that you can be with anyone if this is the condition. You can be with anyone because your problem is not to change the person that you have in front of you, but to love them. So it's a challenge and it's painful and it's hard, but it's also amazing. Because then, God surprises you in ways that you don't expect. And I'll give you an example. When I was in Jerusalem, I went to university, and there were Jewish students with me. And I already told Father Alex the story. Sorry for repeating, but I was in a course of English literature, and we were studying Shakespeare. And this girl, a settler, so someone that is really, like, just to give you an idea, this is someone that believes that no Palestinian should be in Palestine anymore. This is her vision. So she's next to me, we get assigned a project, we have to work on it together. She doesn't know I'm Palestinian. We start working on it. I don't say anything. We go on. And then we enjoy it. And it's going wonderful because we love this play, we're working on. And then at some point she wants to spend more time with me outside of the project. And then at some point she asks me, what do my parents do, where do they work, etc. And I tell her, and my dad teaches in a Palestinian university. So she's shocked. Scandal. How's that possible? Why didn't you tell me? I said, well, I should wear, a flag on my front? I don't know. I didn't feel like it was, the most important thing. We had Shakespeare, right? And so she was scandalized. And it was beautiful because we had a conversation. I said to her, maybe you're so shocked and scandalized because the prejudice you have and the idea you have of who I should be and who I am is sort of falling apart right now. It's collapsing because in front of Shakespeare and how beautiful Shakespeare is, the two of us can only be truly human. You can't be anything but human in front of something beautiful. So I think sometimes, we spend so much time trying to figure out, in political terms or in religious terms, where are the common grounds, And not to diminish, the politics and the importance of, being engaged on a political level. But I mean, on our level, on a daily level, I think that engaging meaning that you share the life, that you share, the circumstances, and that you allow for the person to be who they are and to dialogue about life, about things that are dear to you rather than having a conversation where you're just throwing at someone an idea or a political belief that you've adopted, that you allow for all that you are, your Christianity, your what, like Christ through you to speak to this person, I wanted to share the things that I loved with the people that are different, because then my problem is not anymore to change you, but to share with you, and so it's beautiful because then you're surprised, because you might discover things about the other and about yourself. It might actually purify your own faith in a way that you didn't expect. My being surrounded by diversity in the Holy Land only helped me become more of a Christian in a way, which is paradoxical in a way. And it wasn't because I was persecuted, but because, it's even beautiful sometimes to see people's attachment to their own tradition and to understand the affection that they nurture for their tradition and their belonging. So it's not against us when somebody is different. We just have to find the level of conversation we want to have. If the level of conversation, the departure point is that we're different, or that we have to at some point reach a level where we're the same, then
Thank you. We, immediately following the presentation, if you're interested in seeing the exhibit this evening, you're welcome to just meet back in that corner. And then there are two parts to the exhibit, a video and then the panels themselves inside the chapel. We'll be around until 9 p.m. this evening, so you're welcome to stay for that. If you don't want to go tonight, but you'd like to see it at some other point throughout the week, there are sign-up sheets in the back of church, and you can sign up for one of the times. We have some volunteers who are willing to lead exhibits after daily masses at certain points throughout the week, so you can see those schedules in the back. There is, again, a basket for donations if you'd like to help offset the costs of the mission. Marta was grateful enough not to charge us anything for her speaking. Just we're just paying for her travel and for the exhibit itself. So really grateful for that as well. Next week, Maeda Hussein will be with us, a member of the Muslim faith. She'll be speaking to us about her experience of life and her experience of humanity. This is another side of the mountain, another perspective from which we can look at the life that God sets in front of us. And so it's a tremendous gift. As this tonight, and as this mission continues to unfold, I'm more and more grateful for what's set before us in this season. This is, anyway, I'm just excited about that. Let's thank Marta for being with us. Stand and ask for the Lord's blessing. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Go in peace.
Thanks be to God.
Have a good night.